All right, well, good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome to the Eikon Zen Study Center online class called The True Activity of the Bodhisattva. And what I'd like to do is start out with some introductions, because I imagine that some of you don't know each other, and maybe it would be good to take just a moment to say your name and a little bit about where you practice, just a sentence or two about where you practice. So I'll start. My name is Conan. I am the guiding teacher of Eikon Zen Study Center and also of Empty Hand Zen Center in New Rochelle, New York.
Well, in case we're going in a Partridge Family order, I'm Dana Elliott, and I practice in Athens, Georgia. And Conan is my teacher.
Do we have to hit volume, or can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, well, I'm also in Athens, Georgia. I'm Tom Thrasher, and I attend the Athens Zen group.
Norma?
I'm Norma Fogelberg. I'm in San Francisco currently, and I practice in a multitude of places, and my teacher is in Bloomington, Indiana.
Mm-hmm. Terry?
My name is Terry, and I live at San Francisco Zen Center. I'm a student at City Center in San Francisco. And Conan's my teacher.
Okay. And Margaret? Oops, sorry. Try again, Margaret.
My name is Margaret. I was at Empty Hand for many years. I now live half the year in Florida and half the year in Maine, and I do the best I can in either place.
All right. Great. Well, welcome again, everyone. And for many of us, it's the first time doing an online class. I've been teaching an online class, but using a different technology for a while now. So we'll all help support each other in this way. And so I just want to make a note that, as you can see, everyone can see everyone else. So I really encourage, Margaret says, no, you cannot see everyone.
I can see you.
Uh-huh. Okay.
The camera switches. Now I can see the gal in San Francisco Zen Center.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, maybe that's your iPad. There is a setting. Oftentimes at the bottom, you'll find some settings at the bottom of the screen, and you can see different ways of looking at the screen. But in any event, let's try
Yes.
this.
Gotcha. All of you.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have some different alternatives there. And so that means a couple of things. It means that you're all welcome to interact with each other as well as with me. It also means that you shouldn't do anything you wouldn't do if we were in the same room together, like eating or drinking or changing your clothes or doing other things like that. So otherwise we could be very merry. I will definitely stop you if something starts to happen. But things like just being aware of the background noise and of the volume, and that every time you move your computer that we can hear that creates a sound for the group. Okay, so just trying to settle in and be present with everyone as best you can. And then, as Norma is so demonstrating so well there, if you have a rakusu, it's good to wear it while we're having the class. And also, thank you to folks who have already made their class donations. If you haven't already made a class donation, then you can go to the Eikon Zen Study Center site and take care of that at any point during the class meetings. So I would like to go ahead and get started with today. So you all should have also received the class syllabus. So I'm going to put it up on the screen for just a moment, and we can have a look at it. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Great. So the Eikan Zen Study Center class will be meeting every Thursday night at this time, except for the first Thursday in August. And there's a little bit of summary about the class there. And I'm going to skip by that for a moment and just go to the first class. So today's topic is to have a look at the three translations text, talk a little bit about the sutra in historical context and as part of the Prajnaparamita teachings, right? So this part right here, and as a guide for the Bodhisattva path, sutra in historical context. Okay, and you noticed on the syllabus that each week has basically a koan for you to consider. So I'll return to these questions at the end of the class. For you to consider between now and the next class. So any questions about any of that basic housekeeping items before we move on into the material for tonight? Okay. All right, good. So the Diamond Sutra is the basic text for our class. And the Diamond Sutra is part of a body of teachings that are referred to as the Prajnaparamita teachings. So the original sutra is the Ashtasaka Shrika Prajnaparamita. And that means, that's the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines. And it was translated by Kanze. One of the most common used translations is by Kanze. It looks like this. And it's normally referred to just as the Ashta, or even as the A. And the original 1,000 lines, so when we speak about lines, a line is actually a sloka. The Sanskrit word is sloka, and it means a group, a phrase of 32 syllables. And it dates back to when the teachings were all orally transmitted, right? And so 8,000, the 8,000 sloka version is actually 8,411, but who's counting, really? And then it was increased from there to the 10,000 version, the 15,000 version, the 25,000 version, and the 100,000 line version of the Prajnaparamita teachings. And then some scholars believe that the shorter versions came later, that the teachings were then condensed down to the shorter versions. So the Diamond Sutra is the 300 sloka version of the Prajnaparamita teachings, and the Heart Sutra is the 25 sloka version of the Prajnaparamita teachings. So these are all related. However, if you actually compare the content of the Diamond Sutra is the story of Subhuti, one of the Buddha's disciples, hearing the Prajnaparamita teachings for the first time. So in terms of chronology, it's not clear to us, right? So, and this is often happens, this is often true with the Mahayana Sutras. right? So they were written down. This text was originally in Sanskrit. It's believed to have first been translated in writing into Chinese in about the year 179. So you see that it's a sutra that dates from the beginning of the Common Era, right? The year 0, the year 1, roughly. And that's around the time when the Mahayana started to become a more identifiable movement within Buddhism as a whole. But, for example, the sutra does not ever use that word, Mahayana. That had not come into the parlance yet. It wasn't really identified, and it hadn't identified itself in that way. So we know from that, and from the fact that the sutra doesn't talk about tens of thousands of bodhisattvas being present, that this is one of the earliest of the Mahayana teachings. And it's also one of the best preserved. It is one about which and for which we have a lot of the original texts. Some of you may also know that the sutra is believed to have been the very first dated printed book, the very first printed book. In fact, there is a book called the Diamond Sutra, and it talks all about the finding of copies of this sutra in the Dunhuang caves. And I don't know who that was, but the findings of the actual scrolls in the Dunhuang caves, and even many years, decades after that, the British Museum that owned one of these scrolls continued to display the Gutenberg Bible as the first printed book in the same room with this printed object that's 600 years earlier. It took a long time for it to become clear that that this was so. And you can see that some in this book, the scrolls are beautiful, quite well preserved, actually. So so we have a lot of material about this sutra, and yet again, it's like most Mahayana sutras, it is a dialogue, and it is a dialogue between Shakyamuni Buddha and Subhuti, right? Two historical human beings, two people who actually lived on this earth approximately 2,550 years ago, although more recent scholarship seems to think that the Buddha was even earlier, potentially 100 or 200 years earlier than that. But this dialogue if it actually occurred, would have happened toward the end of the Buddha's career. So after he had given much of what we know as the Nikayas, right? The discourses, the so-called discourses that are the basis of the schools of Theravada today, modern Theravada today. So that we think would have been about 400 before the Common Era. And I'll say a little bit more about the two people that are involved here, but just to say a little bit about the title of it. So the Prajna Paramita Sutra. So Prajna is a Sanskrit word for wisdom. Paramita can be parsed a couple of different ways. Oftentimes it is translated very simply as perfection. But it can also, if it's separated in a different way, mean going to the other shore, going beyond this realm of reasoning, so to speak. So it's also sometimes translated as the ultimate. And I would say, if we understand paramita as an endpoint, that's a mistake. In fact, this sutra will very clearly talk about not stopping at a fixed concept of what we mean by wisdom, not allowing ourselves to set up some kind of fixed point in the future where that might be. So the Prajnaparamita would be the perfection of wisdom, or the wisdom beyond wisdom, right? That is the general context of this set of teachings. And sutra, the word sutra literally means a string. And again, this relates to the way that the teachings were transmitted orally, right? So they were kept in it as like a thread of thought, a thread of thought that someone could verbalize, could just recite. So this is what we mean by the sutra. And Vajracharaka is the name of this particular sutra, the Vajracharaka. So Vajra means diamond, and Charaka means cutting. And interestingly, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which is a sutra from around the same period, in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, or what is typically referred to as just the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha also says, wisdom is like a diamond. Nothing can harm it, and it cuts through all things. So this is the metaphor of the title of the sutra, that this is a kind of wisdom that cuts through even your concepts of wisdom. And I would add that the diamond metaphor also is lovely because it brings to mind this kind of clarity and this kind of luminosity and this very faceted, potentially very faceted view of wisdom. So the Vajracharaka, as I said, is a dialogue. It takes place in Shravasti. So Shravasti was the capital of what was then Kaushala. That's not a province in India anymore, but in northern India. And even at that time, in the Buddhist time, Nagarjuna says there were about 900,000 people in that city. It was quite a big city. And this is important. So Mu Song, one of the commentators, more current contemporary academic commentators on the Diamond Sutra, really paints this portrait of the Buddha as an ascetic, and an ascetic practice, this during the time of the Upanishads, roughly the Buddha's time frame. Asceticism was a movement in India. It was something that was happening, and literally there were these people, including the Buddha, who dropped out of their caste situation, whatever that was, to go on a spiritual journey. But at the same time, there was this kind of mercantilism, and this is sort of Mu Song's theory about this, that there was this kind of mercantilism and more mobility within the society as well. And it was those people who would look to the Shravakas, the folks, the ascetics, to become teachers. So it's an interesting dynamic. These people who basically go from eschewing society to them being held up by society as the folks who can bring forth something that they feel they can't find in their everyday life. So this setting of Shravasti makes a lot of sense, and it is where the Anathapindika, the so-called Anathapindika grove is. So there was a person who gave this land to the Buddha, and Subhuti was related to him. actually.
Hmm.
Subhuti was related to Anathapindika. And so he was Anathapindika's younger brother. He went forth on the day that the monastery was dedicated to the Buddha. And he became one of the foremost disciples. He, in fact, is one of the three best known disciples, and he's known as one of the so-called auditors or one of the hearers. So Ananda, usually in Zen we hear a lot about, or a fair amount about Ananda as the one who heard the sutras. But Subhuti and Shariputra were also understood to be hearers, those who had heard the teaching directly from the Buddha and received it completely. That's how they were understood. So Subhuti is a fascinating character for us because he became known for two things. He became known for his understanding of emptiness, and he also became known for his practice of metta, of loving kindness. And it's for me, it's an interesting juxtaposition there, because oftentimes if there is a sort of very analytical or very conceptual view of emptiness, it can lead to a kind of coolness or a kind of distance or a sense of separation. And yet that Subhuti really embodies the opposite for us, that a true deep understanding, a profound understanding of emptiness actually brings us closer to compassion, closer to loving kindness and friendliness. So, and we'll see how this dialogue unfolds. Subhuti, as I said earlier, he's hearing in this sutra the teachings of emptiness for the first time, and he is very touched by them. And there's a point, if you folks may have read already in the sutra, that there is a point, in fact, in which Subhuti breaks into tears from hearing how beautiful the teaching of emptiness is. And there aren't many places in the sutras where we hear about people breaking into tears, but that is one of them. And so, again, this practice of metta, this practice of loving kindness, of an open heart, Subhuti really comes through as that kind of practitioner for us. And so I'll stop there, and maybe we can have a bit of a conversation about that before going on to a little bit more about the various translations. No questions, no comments, anybody at this point?
Not yet.
Just taking it in? Okay, good. So, just to say a few words about the particular translations. So, now I'm going to share my screen again for just a moment and have you all have a look at that. Okay, so as I mentioned on one of the previous emails, you may have to go up here to the view. Oops, now what happened to my...
You're fine here. Oops.
Yeah, no, my mouse is a little bit slow. Okay, mute. Okay, just a moment, sorry. All right, and then Okay, here we are. So you might need to go up here to view and rotate your view when you first open the PDF for this document. Yeah, everybody is able to do that, I hope. And you'll see that we have the 3 translations side by side. This was compiled actually by San Francisco Zen Center a while back. And as I said in a previous email, I really encourage you to consider buying at least one of these texts. And these 3, I picked these 3, I decided to go with this compilation because I like the comparison of the different kinds of language. I think if you look at Kanze's, form style of translation from the 50s and compare that to Thich Nhat Hanh, which is a very devotional, in a way, kind of translation, a kind of commentary on it, and Red Pine, which is a little bit more from a contemporary academic view, although he is also a practitioner, and I think that comes through in his translation. So these are available, and so the red pine looks like this. They're all available on Amazon. The Thich Nhat Hanh is a very short version. So the red pine is a tome. You can decide for yourselves which one you want to do. And these, of course, do not include all of the additional content. So that's another good reason to have at least one of these books, is because you're lacking all of the footnotes about various kinds of vocabulary and historical context and the comments, some of the commentary. So do consider that. And we will basically start with chapters 1, 2, and 3 next week, although we can go into a little bit of that today if we have time. But basically, the division of the sutras, so the sutras divided up into 32 chapters, and that was done by a Chinese monk. That was not part of the original way that the sutra was developed. And it's 32 because it matches the 32 marks of the Buddha. And this was one of the ways of a very subtle teaching of this sutra as the body of the Buddha. So this is, again, getting into a kind of understanding of the Tathagata that is much more Mahayana than it is Hinayana or Shravakayana, is maybe perhaps a more polite way to refer to them. So this is something for us to keep in mind as we're going through the sutra, that when the Buddha speaks, and actually to some extent when Subhuti speaks, they are representing Buddha as awakened nature of all things. Not just these two historical human beings, but rather the teaching itself as an expression of the Buddha inherent in all things. And this unfolds in a way in terms of how the sutra talks about wisdom, in terms of how the Buddha himself demonstrates wisdom, in terms of the way that the bodhisattvas are instructed to act. So thinking about this text as the body of Buddha, it also brings to mind something about you could say, a much a more vast way of thinking about merit. And so merit is a topic that comes up a lot in this sutra. Merit meaning the beneficial consequences of practice, to put it simply. And the emphasis here is again on taking this incredibly vast view of beings. So the basic teachings of emptiness, the basic teachings of emptiness would be something along the lines of all things are arising interdependently. And the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, encouraged his students to study this in their own bodies and minds, right? A lot, if we think about, for example, him telling monks to go to the charnel grounds and have a look, what's going on there, right? So that form of the teaching of emptiness is very familiar, perhaps. And the wisdom beyond wisdom, however, takes that to another goes beyond that to say that even that view of emptiness is ever changing, right? Which means that as my master Harada Roshi used to say, it's not that things are constantly changing, that there's one thing that is changing from moment to moment in a continuous way. It's that each moment is a completely new thing, right? Like sometimes some of you have heard me use the metaphor of the symphony. When there's a crescendo, it's that instant, and it's all of the instruments playing at the same time, and that creates a particular kind of sound, and in the next instant, it's a different sound. It's a completely different thing. It could be silence. And this view of emptiness in our lives affects the way that we as bodhisattvas work with intentionality. So that's where we're going to go with this. We're going to talk about intention. We're going to talk about how this kind of deep understanding of emptiness can actually work in a day-to-day kind of way. And before we get any further into that, I want to read to you from the historical Buddha in the numerical discourses in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Fives. He says this. This is to encourage you all. So he says, in the future, there will be, he says bhikkhus, but we could expand that to say, practitioners. There will be practitioners who are undeveloped in body, virtuous behavior, mind, and wisdom. And when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata are being recited, that are deep in meaning, world transcending, connected with emptiness, they will not want to listen to them. They will not lend an ear to them or apply their minds to understand them. But when those discourses are being recited that are mere poetry composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases, they will want to listen to them. So this is a future peril that you should make an effort to abandon. So the Buddha is exhorting us by saying that even in his time, the teaching of emptiness requires some effort to understand. And it may not be very poetic. It requires some difficult language sometimes. And it's my hope to work through that with you, and that we can actually find the poetry in this kind of language. So, anything on that part? Questions, comments, concerns?
I like your symphony analogy.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
With everything playing together, everything affecting everything else.
Yes.
All happening continuously. I
Yes.
really like
Yes. Well, and I even like to take it sometimes a little bit further and encourage you to see yourself as an instrument, right? We are an instrument of the Dharma. That's
being played.
yes, right. That's right. So I think of the precept of living and being lived for the benefit of all beings, right? We are being lived in our practice as much as we are living it intentionally.
Yes.
So lovely. Well, any other comments or questions, thoughts?
There's one thing that came to mind with me when you were talking about prajna.
Mm-hmm.
I heard Red Pine in a recorded seminar say that the pra part of it comes into English out of the Greek in our words like prognosis. It has to do with knowing before knowing.
Mm-hmm.
We say wisdom beyond wisdom, but it's really before you even know that you know, it's present. And I just am a word person, so I found that very interesting.
Well, it sounds to me a lot like Dogen's view of enlightenment, right? Dogen's view of enlightenment as inherent.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about enlightenment as being in absolute harmony with the nature of change and the nature of interconnectedness, then of course we are that thing. We must by nature be that, because we are fully integrated into it. Just like we must, the drop in the ocean must by nature be salt water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No matter how hard we fight it.
No matter how confused we get very confused about it.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of confused, so the other thing that I would like to bring up for you is one of the oldest Zen teachings on the Diamond Sutra is about Tozan. So, Tozan was an expert in the Diamond Sutra, and he was going to the monastery. And in order to get to the monastery, he stopped at the tea shop. Right?
And he great tea lady stories.
One of these great tea lady stories, and he was carrying his treatises on his back, which was unbelievable. You think of somebody having like a whole chest of drawers basically on their back at that time. These scholars that would walk around with the big books. And the tea lady says, "Oh, you're an expert in the Diamond Sutra. Great. Well, the Diamond Sutra says the mind of the past cannot be grasped. The mind of the future cannot be grasped. The mind of the present cannot be grasped. So with which mind will you eat your tea treats?" And he's stumped. He's so stumped that he basically goes up the mountain and proceeds to burn all his treatises. So I bring that up because we don't have to burn our books. I hope we can maintain some flexible mind about how we understand the sutra and about what does it mean? What does it mean to eat your tea treats with no mind? What does it mean to really have an embodied existence, an actual experience, lived experience of the nature of change? Right? And one that can be very hopeful, because ultimately that's what the Bodhisattva path is all about. The Bodhisattva path is a very hopeful path. It says that everything we do matters. It matters to other beings and it matters to us. And it turns our self-preoccupation actually into a tool for helping the whole world. Right? So if we understand, going back to the topic of merit for a second, if we understand karma, intentional action, and merit in this way, in this incredibly vast, interconnected way, then we can see how being of service in the world is being of service to ourselves. So I think Subhuti knew something about that. It's also fascinating to me that the Buddha named him in the Anguttara Nikaya. He also named him one of the most worthy of offerings. He really liked Subhuti. The Buddha really honored Subhuti as a practitioner in many ways. In many different ways. So he, unlike Shariputra in the Heart Sutra, so Shariputra in the Heart Sutra, Shariputra was the general of the Dharma. He was a very, very stern practitioner. And in the Heart Sutra, he gets taken to task. Basically, he gets, nearly scolded by Avalokiteshvara, right? Form is none other than emptiness. Emptiness is none other than form. But in this sutra, and we'll see a little bit of some of the differences here. So for example, Red Pine, Bill Porter, sees Subhuti as sometimes speaking from the more Theravadan view, and yet Thich Nhat Hanh sees that slightly differently. When Thich Nhat Hanh reads the same passages, he interprets it slightly differently and sees Subhuti as always coming from the standpoint of compassion, regardless of Theravada or Mahayana view. So we'll have a look and we'll see what resonates for us in terms of that discourse that happens between them. But for now, I don't want to get too much further into the sutra itself. So I'll talk a little bit about the homework for this week. So the 3 questions that you have, and we could even discuss a little bit of the 3 questions today off the cuff, but certainly I would like you to sit with them for the next week. So the 3 questions you have for homework this week are you ready to be on the path of the Bodhisattva? What stands in your way and what supports you? So, like all good koans, the answer may change from day to day, from moment to moment, between now and next week. But perhaps some of you would like to say a little bit about these questions, or how even you would think about these questions.
I had a question about the first question. are you ready to be on the path? And my question was, are you ever not on that path, whether you're ready or not?
Well, that's a good question, Margaret. You know, that's an important point. So to have the intention to be a bodhisattva is said to be one of the most important steps. And yet, you cannot actually be on the path of a bodhisattva unless you are taking action as a bodhisattva. That distinction is made very clear. And it's actually made very clear in the sutra what kind of action is helpful and is skillful. But the bodhisattva path is definitely a path of action.
Okay.
So you can be not on the path. You can even have the intention to be on the path and still not be on the path because you're not actually living into it.
But we're always acting. Whether we're acting skillfully or unskillfully, whether we're acting thoughtfully or unthoughtfully, we are functioning. And in the process, we're affecting everyone else.
Yes,
So
but the bodhisattva path...
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
We may or may not be technically on that path in terms of intention, but we are functioning that way.
The fact that we are affecting all people is truly happening no matter whether we understand it or do not understand it or aware of it or not aware of it. I entirely agree with you. But the bodhisattva path is a path of intention and a path of activity to benefit beings. So it specifically takes an understanding of the absolute and brings it into the subjective realm and says, we have to actually make that kind of discernment. This is where the concept of skillful means starts to come in, the concept of upaya, right? That we actually have to make it manifest. Or as Dogen would say, all beings are Buddha nature and yet is not realized without practice. Realized in the sense of understood experience, but also realized in the sense of brought into being.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Norma, you wanted to say something. I thought I saw a hand.
I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to say a word or two about the question of being on the bodhisattva path? Or what supports you, or what difficulty you might want to share with the group? Oh, Tom, hold on, Tom. Wait, I had muted you because of some background noise. Hold on. Okay, there you go.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In the spirit of there are no dumb questions, how do we know even if we have intention of being on the path, how do we know if our action is truly skillful?
It can be a very subtle discernment. And basically the teachings of wisdom and the precepts, those are the two ways, I'm going to mute you again, Tom. Oh no, actually, let me just finish this and then maybe we'll mute you in a second. So the tools that we have to help us discern skillfulness as bodhisattvas are exactly this. These sutras, the Mahayana sutras, the teachings of wisdom, and the teachings of wisdom as they manifest in the contemporary world, right? So other books, other teachers, this class, I hope, and the precepts. So the precepts can be understood in many different ways. One way to understand them is that they are sort of rules for behavior. Another way to understand the precepts is as aspirational. And another way to understand the precepts I would propose is that they are actually description of the cause and effect of our life. If we behave in these ways, then there will be skillful consequences. And if we behave in other ways, there will be unskillful consequences. And so they give us a way they tell us a little bit about the way things work. When I take the vow to live and be lived for all beings, then that vow can support me, can support all beings, can be part of a skillful path. So, or when I take the vow not to do evil, for example, right? One of the three pure precepts. So the precepts are, in a way, describing reality, the reality of how karma works, how the path works. Do you have another question, a follow-up question on that?
Yeah, well, what's arising within me is, on the one hand, my readings so far of the Dhamma Sutra, I come away with the impression that appropriate, skillful, compassionate action arises spontaneously from an awakened mind and a compassionate heart, or without discernment, without the interference of language or conceptualizing. But then it seems as though we still need some expressed conceptualized standards to discern. And it seems like a kind of dialectic that requires navigation. That's what.
Yes. 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 Right. So when we have a perfectly clear experience, knowing of interconnectedness and impermanence, then we act from compassion and harmony and enlightenment. That's what that means. But most of the time, we're a little more confused than that. We're not quite that clear. So we have to find the skillful means. We have to take these wisdom teachings and put them into some kind of understandable language. We have to take the precepts into our lives and figure out, what does it mean to say, I will not do evil, I will not kill, I vow to take refuge in the Buddha. We have to really find for ourselves that the meaning of that. Yeah, it's a big task. It's a lifetime task. Yes, Norma?
I think when I look at, for me, what stands in my way, it's muddling through those teachings. You know, it's almost, I don't want to use the word easy, but I can sit. You know, I can watch my attitude. I can work with other people. But I think what really trips me up is taking the time to break down the intellectual into the practical. Mm-hmm. And I find it really frustrating that Buddha had to put it in this very complicated and intellectual way, because it doesn't, not easily, but it's just so much effort and struggle to understand so much of the teaching. Mm. And it can stop you. It can stop me. It's like, okay, quite honestly, it's easy to go back to the precepts or the 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. You know, I got the 10 Commandments down. I have the precepts down. If I could just stay on that path, I'd be happy. But in essence, our practice says you can't just stay on that path. you have to trip over the stones. You have to wonder how you're going to get on the other side of the stream. And you can't do it simply. Yet, it is simple once you understand it. So I think that situations like this, where we can start to take apart some of this, is helpful for me in removing my frustrations.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do find it particularly frustrating when I want to practice deeper, but I have to siphon through all this text to get to something I can practice with. Because
Yes.
so much of it for me is unpracticable without breaking down this intellectual presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Or called study, or called texts. So anyway, that's my challenge mostly.
I appreciate the comment, Norma. I appreciate the comment, because to me that it expresses a lot of sincerity in practice, right? It's very easy to just brush it off, to just say, I'm not going to go there. But to make the effort to look at these teachings, because frankly, we're trying to put the inconceivable into words, right? So and this is again why the metaphor of the diamond is so lovely, because we have the myriad facets, and we can't deal with the myriad facets, frankly. It's just too much.
Overwhelming.
So, yeah. And so we have to really take it a little bit at a time and see how we can deconstruct it a little bit and put it into some current language, some language that starts to make a little bit more sense. And I hope we'll be able to do that. But yes, I really appreciate the comment, because it also reminds me of Harada Roshi saying over and over again, our practice is hearing, thinking, practice. Hearing, thinking, practice. Hearing, thinking, practice. Right? There's a thinking part that has to happen in there in order for us to have some kind of framework for our experience and our intention. Otherwise, it's just kind of dull.
Yeah, and it also parallels to me the importance, again, in breaking this down, deconstructing it, the importance of Sangha, the importance of our Zazen, and the importance of our study.
Yes.
Because when there's not someone like you around to comment on an action, I will turn to my dear friend Dana and say, help me out here with my intention. Will you be my mirror? And then with that, you can let go of it and meditate. So, yeah, didn't make it easy, did he?
No, it's going to take some effort. But well worth it.
Yeah.
So we're at our time. We're actually just a little bit over our time. So I want to thank you all for this evening. And now that you know the technology, you're all set for next week. Please don't hesitate to drop me an email or give me a call if you want to talk about the material between now and then. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Well,
Bye.